There is a form of evangelism that heals the world. There is a form of evangelism that embodies good news and life and flourishing. And that's what we want to practice, whatever we call it. That's who we want to be, right?
Welcome to the Fresh Expressions Podcast, Season 5. I'm Heather Jalad, a pastor and cultivator of new faith communities that aim to reach new people in surprising places. This season focuses on community, how to build it, and how new kinds of churches can help combat the loneliness epidemic in North America. Along the way, I'll be joined by friends from the movement to co-host and add their insights as practitioners of Fresh Expressions of Church. We hope this episode deepens your understanding of loving our neighbors and leading faith communities in today's changing landscape. If you enjoy our podcast, please help us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or sharing an episode with friends or on social media. Now, let's dive in. In this episode of the Fresh Expressions podcast, I have a conversation with Elaine, Heath, and Charles Kiser. They co-authored the book Trauma-Informed Evangelism, geared toward cultivating communities of wounded healers. For this season's focus being on creating community in the midst of our epidemic of loneliness, this is significant. Elaine is a pastor, theologian, teacher, author, and currently the abbess of the Spring Forest community, also called the Pharmastery in rural North Carolina. Charles is pastor of the Storyline Church in Texas and is a contextual theologian. I appreciate so much how they have lent their voices to this conversation and the guidance that they give us, the church, as we move forward to creating these and cultivating these communities of wounded healers in our work of Fresh Expressions. Give a listen. Welcome back to the Fresh Expressions podcast. I am Heather Jalad, and I get to have a conversation today with two extraordinary people who have just made such an impact and are continuing to make such an impact on the church. Elaine, Heath, welcome back second time, and Charles Kiser. Just excited to get to speak to both of you specifically around the book that you co-authored in Trauma-Informed Evangelism, and this idea of cultivating communities of wounded healers. Really appreciate that because we are focusing this season on community in particular and how that is an opportunity to address the loneliness epidemic that we find ourselves in the midst of, and what role the church has to play in that. So I would love for the two of you to just briefly introduce yourselves the way you like to be introduced, and we'll get this conversation going. Charles, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I was a pastor and a church planner for 16 years in the Dallas, Texas area, and I'm in the midst of wrapping up that assignment and the work ahead of me. I have a couple of roles. One is as a regional developer for the Post-Evangelical Collective in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, to work to help cultivate new expressions of post-evangelical community in our area. And the other is co-founding a ministry called the Healing Collective with my colleague, Dr. Mallory Wyckoff, that helps to extend some of this religious trauma work that we'll be talking about today, kind of into conversation with religious leaders and with survivors of religious harm to continue the healing work. And I'm married and have 3 kids, and I have a frenetic Boston Terrier named Gus.
I love it. I love it. Elaine.
Hi, everybody. I live in North Carolina, just outside of Durham, on a farm with a number of friends. There are 4 family units living at the farm. We kind of call that the Pharmastery. The name of our community and our larger ministries beyond the farm is the church at Spring Forest. I started out in ministry as a pastor of local churches, United Methodist, and then went into academia full time. I served as the McCreeless Professor of Evangelism for 11 years at Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University, and then went to Duke Divinity School to serve as dean for a couple of years, and then retired in order to really develop Spring Forest. So I serve as abbess to our community, and our community is both residential, as I mentioned, but it's also dispersed. We have folks who live within an hour or two's drive they're regularly involved at things that we do on the land. And then we also have folks from around the world who are part of our digital community. And so it's really a wonderful, exciting time. Our community is growing and evolving. And I'm very involved now with imagining fresh expressions with the North Carolina Conference and helping to develop some equipping programming for people who are going to lead fresh expressions.
Wonderful.
And I also have a dog named Dill, who's a border collie. We take care of the goats, herd them around, married, 2 daughters, and really am happy to be here on this podcast.
So glad to have you. I feel like I should say my dog's name. My dog is Domino, and she's crazy. So that's how we like it, I guess. I don't know.
Solidarity and the crazy dogs. Yes.
Solidarity and crazy dogs. That anyone that comes to my house, I'm like, are you good with crazy dogs? Thank you both so much for taking the time out. If you're not, if you're listening on the podcast and not watching on YouTube, I encourage you to go over to our YouTube channel and appreciate Elaine being who Elaine is, because she is outside right now by a lake recording this podcast. Love you so much. Appreciate you so much. So this whole idea of forming community, as I said, is a significant part of the Fresh Expressions journey. But the two of you have come at this, communities come in all shapes and sizes, and specifically from those who have experienced trauma. And so I would love for both of you to kind of take a stab at, what precipitated this book becoming a reality.
The seeds of the book came from, in part, from my pastoral experience in Dallas. Several years ago, right after the 2016 election, in fact, we had moved to a new neighborhood, and as a part of moving to a new neighborhood, we were wanting to kind of explore and discern with some friends that we were part of church with, what would a new expression of Christian community look like in our neighborhood? And our instinct for that was to show up in our neighborhood in various places and to try to discern, okay, where are the social hubs? Where are people gathering? What's God up to? How can we join in and participate? And we experienced such a warm welcome on a Sunday night at a local bar, where a board gaming group was meeting that had a Sunday night rhythm to get together and play these obscure strategy board games that I had never heard of. I'm not by nature or temperament a strategy analytical board gaming type, but they were so hospitable. The host welcomed us in and sat us down and said, "Are y'all here for board games?" "Yes." Have you played many board games? Monopoly, Risk, I don't know. And what would you like me to teach you? One of my favorite games. Yes, please. That'd be wonderful. And so he taught us a board game, and we just kept going back because we found warmth and connection there with these neighbors who were meeting. Usually 20 or 30 folks, but we've come to discover there are probably 100 folks who would rotate in and out of this bar on Sunday nights. And so we just started joining in that rhythm as part of what it meant for us to be spiritual community, and received hospitality from them, would go to their apartments on Saturday afternoons and play in these board gaming marathons for 10 hours. And then thought, oh, we should reciprocate. And we have kids and they have kids. What if we did like a family game night? So that became a part of the rhythm and the ecosystem of this board gaming network. And probably 2 or 3 years into those relationships, I was in a doctoral program with Fitch at Northern in Chicagoland, and I was learning about sociological and qualitative research, ethnographic interviews, and culture learning. And I was like, I want to use this project opportunity in this particular class I was in to learn more about this board gaming group. And so I developed an interview schedule, just curious about like, what's the fabric of community here? Is this really a lot of like non-religious friends? This is their home base in terms of relationships and community in a way that church had been for me for most of my life. And so I asked them, I had a bunch of questions. The last of them, all my friends know I'm a pastor, so it's not a surprise. I can't help asking a question about spirituality or some connection to that. And I ask a question like, is there anything spiritual or transcendent to you about your experience in this board gaming group? And most of my friends, self-described agnostic or atheist in this group, predictably said, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I don't really have those categories. But, and then almost to a person, that initial foray of interviews was about 10 people. Almost to a person, they continued to say, but can I tell you about the terrible things that have happened to me in religion?
Yeah.
And I was struck. It got my attention. I was heartbroken. I was intrigued, and that set a trajectory for me to learn what am I hearing? What is going on? It's surfacing my own adverse religious experiences. But what I was discovering was these experiences of spiritual abuse and religious trauma. It was all along the spectrum, denominationally, Protestant and Catholic, evangelical and mainline. And that set the trajectory for my doctoral thesis, which Elaine was my supervisor for. And after that project, what I learned through that was so meaningful to me. I was like, well, and it's in the middle of COVID. Well, I want to put this out into the world. And so that became trauma-informed evangelism. And Elaine contributed her perspectives and her own experiences into that project to make it what it was.
And Elaine, when Charles reached out to you, I mean, first of all, you were his supervisor or his professional associate that he had on this project. I mean, were you all in from the beginning, or did this kind of like emerge over time?
Yeah, I was all in from the beginning. I had met Charles previously for an organization. I had done a seminar with them, and I had met him. Didn't really know him yet, but when he reached out to me and he sent me his, proposal for what he wanted to work on, I was immediately in because he wanted to work on religious trauma. It's, the spiritual abuse that happens to so many people. And my whole vocation in academia and as a pastor has been focused on helping people to deconstruct bad theology and bad versions of church and bad ideas about God, and definitely bad forms of evangelism and mission, and reconstruct what is really gospel-centric and beautiful and healing and fully inclusive of everybody and all of that. And so what I saw in Charles' proposal was, alignment. And I could see that he was a very good scholar and an excellent writer. And so I said yes. And it's been a joy to work with him and a joy to write with him and to be a colleague now and to teach together sometimes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Charles, my goodness, the stories that you share along the way throughout this book are just so powerful in, just bringing to life in full color what these traumatic experiences are and how they're experienced and how they are, the harm that they do and continue to do over time. And can I just say, I appreciate so much that you're a PK and that you have done this work, because there you've named, both of you have named so many things that people are just absolutely unaware of. There are so many blind spots too, I think, within the church as we know it, within the institution, and you have really uncovered these in so many ways. And I just want to say thank you. One of the things that you talk about, Charles, in here is this, as a result of trauma, whether it's big trauma or little trauma, which it's traumatic, whether for whatever the situation is, it's trauma for that person, right? But how it disorders your imagination and essentially leads you to this place of hopelessness, and how these communities of healing can be a place of hope once again for a person. So you talk about, the word evangelism is in the title of the book, which is so loaded and has so much baggage and has been so poorly practiced and taught about, and so many other things experienced by so many of us, that again, I just have to say I appreciate what you've done there, and taking this thing that people think of as a transaction, to bringing it back to what it's meant to be, and that is relationship, right? It's all about relationship, and both of you really talk about, and even you, Charles, 2 to 3 years in this gaming group, where you could get to the point where you ask those questions, and that you would feel safe to ask them, and they would feel safe with you asking those questions, right? That it's a long game. We're talking about, that consistency that Elaine talks about, and showing up, and, just those little things that happen over time. So talk a little bit about, there was a decision made at some point in time to include evangelism in the title. I'm just curious as to, what went into that, and then what do you see coming out of, I guess, the work of this book, or the work that this book is really meant to accomplish?
I remember writing up a proposal, and this is me pitching it to Elaine, so that's what's coming. I remember writing a proposal for a book that, after Elaine had said, yeah, let's work on a book together. And my imagination at the time was something like trauma-informed mission. And Elaine's response was, what if we focused it on evangelism? Elaine, I don't know if you remember that, but maybe that's my way of saying what shaped the impulse for you in like sharpening this to the work of evangelism particularly.
Oh, what made me want to say that was that because so much harm is done by evangelism.
Yeah.
Sort of transactional, trying to scare the hell out of people.
Right.
You got the goods and you don't. And I knew that if we use the word evangelism in the title, we would attract the very audience that needs to read this book.
Wow.
The very audience that has the blind spots, not because they're bad people or any of that. It's just what people inherited, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is what's happening. That's been our experience of what's happening. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow.
I do think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And I honestly have like an allergy to evangelism, and maybe every other day, just the word, the language, for all of the obvious reasons. And I think that is that Elaine's impulse was so wise, because it invites into conversation the very folks that are still interested in evangelism, who may have some disordered imagination about what it is, to kind of see when it goes wrong, or when it gets out sideways, the harm that it can cause, but also that there is a form of evangelism that heals the world. There is a form of evangelism that embodies good news and life and flourishing. And that's what we want to practice, whatever we call it. That's who we want to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, even if you think about the Greek word and what Jesus came to do and how it meant that he emptied himself of everything and took on the form of a servant, right? That he didn't come with all the goods and the answers and, all the things, but true evangelism is meeting people where they are on their terms, right? And at their pace and listening far more than answering any questions or making any statements or anything else. And that is something, that is just tantamount to forming community and relationship with people that are not a part of the church. And I think you talked about in the beginning of the book, you kind of talked about your church planning experience and how you went into this like shopping area with a bunch of people and you were asking all of these questions of people and like people were recoiling or like running away from you or, short little answers or whatever about, what are you looking for in a church, and it's just like so me centric instead of like, who are you as a human, and what are your hopes and dreams? And, it's just, I think it helps to reframe. And that's really what we're talking about in these fresh expressions of church. We have to reframe some of, what you name in the book and the bad theology or the cultural paradigms and the structures of the church that we have inherited that have created a lot of these blind spots or have become all about attraction and me and how do we get people to come to us and yet to the detriment of really knowing and being known, right? I mean, so I just appreciated how you named those things and how you went from that to this gaming community, and honestly, I think recognized the work of God there in so many significant ways over time in those relationships. And being able to take the space or the posture of this wounded person who wants for others the healing that you have found, right? I mean, so say a little bit more about that.
It did make me think kind of, if I was to try to put into words some of the shift in evangelism, one way of thinking about it is the shift from conversionism to embodiment.
Yeah.
That so much of evangelism and the way that it's been disordered and become coercive is because it's really conversionism. It's focused on controlling an outcome. And because it's controlling an outcome or seeking to control an outcome, it objectifies and transactionalizes relationship with people and our neighbors in order to get them saved, get them baptized, get them to say the prayer, get them to do whatever it is that helps us to feel like they crossed the threshold and the boundary into salvation or whatever. We're trying to convert people. And the paradigm shift, I think, releases those outcomes to God and to our neighbors, and instead focuses on embodiment. How do we live out the good news in our community? How do we embody that good news? How do we embody the fruit of the Spirit in love and joy and peace and patience and generosity with each other? And then as we're companioning and present and among our neighbors, they bear witness to our embodied witness as a community. And in my experience is they're curious about it. Oh, this is not what I'm used to seeing Christians be like. Y'all can be good people.
A lot of times in Fresh Expressions, we talk about the withness to our witness, right? Like it can't be one or that. Like it has to be embodied. It's an incarnational. It's Jesus, took on flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. And it wasn't a neighborhood he chose for himself, right? It was, it was flesh and blood. It was fragile. It was vulnerable. It was, all of those other things. It was humble. And and so when you talk about embodied evangelism, just continue what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in the
in the context of trauma, and in my context, religious trauma in particular, when you add those frames for trauma healing to a paradigm for embodiment, it makes it come alive all the more because, as you have said, while we like experience trauma through relationships, we also experience healing through
Yes.
relationships. Judith Herman is a trauma expert that I leaned on a lot in the work, and she talks about these stages of recovery and how there is a stage of building safety and connection between people that is you can't rush it. You can't you the evangelist, the community does not determine safety. Our neighbor does, the one who's carrying trauma does.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's part of the long haul process, is just the patient companioning that's required without any kind of agenda except just to be present, just and to be love and kindness and goodness to our neighbor. That's what was happening in our participation in the board gaming group before those interviews. I didn't know what was going on, but in retrospect, I see, I don't think I would have ever heard those stories were it not for the safety that had been created in our relationships over that 2 to 3 year period. And that safety creates the space for the second stage of recovery, which is just simply putting the pieces of the story and the stories back together and telling the story of what happened. And trauma fragments our memories. It represses our memories. It lodges those memories in our bodies. And safety creates the conditions where that story can be named and witnessed. And the role of an evangelist, a trauma-informed evangelist, is to bear witness with compassion and with empathy rather than judgment or defensiveness, and to mourn that story, to mourn, to grieve with our neighbor, and to say, I wish that had never happened to you. I'm so sorry. That should never have happened anywhere, much less the church. And even just in that kind of work of embodiment and relationship, the trauma can start to unwind and dislodge from the ways that it's stuck in our neighbors' nervous systems related to their adverse religious experiences.
Gosh, I mean, what has kind of been on refrain over and over since reading your book is this whole idea of the disease being the cure. And, and how the thing that traumatized the person in the first place can become the cure if done rightly. And the redemption that can happen there if we're attentive enough to it, and that it's not this magical thing that happens, but that, frankly, in all things, God is in charge of the outcomes. I can just do my part, right? Like, I can't make somebody do this, that, or the other. I can't save somebody. Salvation is not something I can do. But I can love a person like God has loved us, and that, over time in our relationships, it's in those places where people begin to feel safe to maybe share some part of themselves that they felt scared to share before, or felt too broken about, that they, that nobody wants to know that about them, or is going to love them if they knew that about them, or whatever else. Elaine, how have you, you have created a community there at Spring Forest you have literally created a community of wounded healers there. So kind of, I guess, could you unpack really kind of how that came about, and then maybe what that looks like today for you?
Sure. Well, Spring Forest is it started maybe 20 years ago in Ohio, and then to Texas, kind of gradually evolved the community that we are. So, of course, the people who are in Spring Forest now were not there in Texas and everything. But it's been an evolution of learning how to create a community of wounded healers. and how to create intentional community that's has the ability to stay healthy and to not be self-absorbed and some of the other, you know, pitfalls that happen to intentional communities. Anyway, we have evolved into this community where people who have been harmed by religion, not just Christianity, primarily Christianity, but some other religions too, just find their way to us through the farming activities, through our nutrition things that we do, through retreats, and through children's programming, a range of things that we do that engage the broader world around us. That's how people typically find their way to us. But we have walked with a number of people in the last few years through recovery from severe trauma, homelessness, profound domestic violence. We work with refugees. Every refugee who comes to the U.S. or goes anywhere has been so traumatized by the initial losses due to war or famine or climate crises. And then when they go to refugee camps, they're even more traumatized by the dangers and the lack and all the things that happen there. So we do support refugee resettlement, and so much of our work with refugees is around helping them learn English and get some adjust to the cultural differences. And we have a program called Global Friends, and it's different than just an ESL class. It involves mutual friendships and activities for the children and social events, actual building of friendships. So we do that, and then we're able to also help people connect with social services as needed. So that's one group of people that we support with our farming endeavor and with other things that we do. And then we've had people come and literally wander into a drum circle we were holding, or some other thing that we're doing, and we form a relationship and follow that same process that Charles was talking about. So we've helped people who needed wraparound care, who needed a therapist, they needed medical care, they needed to be connected to food stamps, and all those kind of things when you're really devastated by situations that life sometimes brings. And so we've been able to walk with people through those processes and hear the stories, and gradually the stories become more coherent. As Charles mentioned, trauma fragments our ability to tell story in a linear way because of what happens in the amygdala, when we're activated by fear and so on. It helped people get the legal help they need. It helped people find a home, helped people get a car, these kinds of things. So for Spring Forest, we do this on a very small and local scale, 1 or 2 people at a time. Then through our program with refugees, partnered with World Relief, we usually have, maybe 6 or 8 families at a time in the program. So it's small and local, but this is part of the wisdom of what I feel the best forms of fresh expressions is being small and local, very contextual, deeply relational, where we actually know one another. And that's where the trust can be built to help people actually heal from some terrible things. I'm remembering too a definition of trauma that Gabor Mate offers as one definition, is that trauma is not what happens to us, it's what we're left holding in the absence of an empathetic witness. And then in other ways we can think about trauma is the imprint that it leaves in our bodies, the neurological imprint, the muscle memory imprint. And so in the context of these trusting relationships where we're weeding the peas together, we're fixing a meal together, we're watching a movie together, we're just, doing the dishes together. The stories come forth. As the stories come forth, as trauma-informed people, we can listen and be the empathetic witness and begin to create this space, this container to hold the pain as it comes out. Being empathetic means we're probably going to get some tears in our eyes when our friend here is crying. we're going to learn how to have the listening skills and the response skills that are going to create that safe space. And then when some professional help is needed, we're going to learn how to refer people and walk with them and go see the doctor with them if that's what they need to have happen. One time I was working with a person companioning her who had been infected by a perpetrator and needed to go see a doctor and was afraid to go alone and asked me to go in the examining room. And so I just went in the examining room and sat silently near so that she would know I was there. And at one point she was so scared and I said, I'm right here. I'm right here. And then she calmed down. She just needed to know the empathetic witness was right there.
Yeah.
So it's like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously someone who has experienced similar trauma to the person that you are forming this relationship, empathy is not a problem probably at all, right? But there are those of us who don't even recognize our own trauma or experiences of trauma or can't name those. And so I'm wondering like how you have or how you've seen this play out, that you don't create a trauma bond with people, right? Like to me, that's a fear that I think people have to reckon with when you're looking at people that have experienced a large degree of trauma. Like, how do you prevent that trauma bond from happening to where you can't move forward to wholeness and health, right? So, I mean, can you just maybe share, either one of you or both of you, how you've been able to navigate that?
The biggest thing, and I'm guessing, Charles, you would agree with this, is for us to keep working on our own unfinished business. We ourselves, as people who are caring for others with trauma, need to actively, in an ongoing way, work on our own inner journey, healing from the wounds we carry, doing our spiritual formation work, and having a circle of friends that we are vulnerable with, and, spiritual friends that help us to keep showing up in honest ways. I think 12-step spirituality can help us with this sort of thing.
Everybody should be working the steps.
Yeah. So that's my beginning of my answer. Charles, maybe you could jump in.
Yes, I always agree with Elaine. I can't think of a time I've disagreed with Elaine. Whatever it does.
Whatever Elaine says.
Yes and amen. That's exactly where my head goes, is that I think a lot, especially when we're talking about practices like evangelism or practices of cultivating communities, the conversation, we're drawn to conversations about what are the skills and the competencies of doing this. And that's important, but unless we attend to the deeper layer of the interior work and identity formation and our own trauma processing, it will subvert the skills and the skills and the competencies will flow out of a healthy interior life. I think we anticipate or prevent the trauma bonds or other pitfalls by paying attention to our own work, which I think about the big sources of resilience and interior work. And I'm drawing on a STAR framework, Strategies for Trauma Awareness and Resilience, out of Eastern Mennonite University. They talk about three big sources of resilience. One is body-brain regulation. So I have some practices to discharge the stressful energies in my body that are lodged in my nervous system. It could be yoga or massage or farming at Spring Forest or exercise, any way that I'm helping to regulate my nervous system. That is a source that gets us to a place where we're centered enough to pay attention to our interiors. The second component is relational or social support. It's what we've been talking about, that we have a community of people
we have a close-knit support system who we're safe with that can be our empathetic witness when we're processing our stuff. And then third, that we have some kind of spiritual connection to however we conceive of it, to the divine, to the transcendent, to the divine community, that it could be contemplative practice and silence. It could be being in God's beautiful creation like Elaine is this morning. Whatever connects us, those are parts of the interior work that prepare us to hold space for people and to be empathetic witnesses to their pain in ways that are healing and healthy for them.
That's so helpful. I appreciate you sharing that, Charles. I think when I think about the work that both of you have done and are doing, I just want to make sure that what you are saying is heard loud and clear by the church, so that we can continue this embodied evangelism, this incarnational witness that we're called to be a part of, because the Elaine, you kind of name this, and Charles, you name all of the kind of the systems that we have inherited, and how, if we're not discerning enough, if we don't look closely enough, we can miss all of the harm that's been done by those systems and continues to be done by those systems. But Elaine, one thing that you said that I really, really appreciated was that repentance is the way forward for the church. And when you said that in the book, I was just like, yeah, but confession has to come before repentance, right? And there has to be a level of awareness to be able to turn from whatever that is. So, yeah, I mean, the scene that came to mind for me, really, in reading all that both of you shared, was something that Donald Miller shared in Blue Light Jazz, when he went to and he set up the confession booth, and everybody was expecting that he wanted to take their confessions, and what he did was confess the harm that the church had done, and how disarming that is, right? Like, how disarming is that, and how repentant is that? And so I'm wondering, just to kind of I could talk to the both of you all day long, but what does that look like? What are one or two things that we could do um, as the church, and or looking to cultivate these communities? I mean, that's a big question right there, but I will invite you to answer that however the Spirit leads you. What's one or two things the church can do, or what are one or two things that we can do personally to cultivate these kinds of communities?
Well, at the most basic level, when we do form relationships with neighbors and someone divulges how they were harmed by the church, like the people when Charles finally had those relationships and wanted to talk to them, do some ethnographic work, they said, well, but can I tell you how I was harmed? Okay, so when people tell us how they were harmed, we listen carefully, and then we apologize on behalf of the church. We apologize and we say something like this: I am so sorry that happened to you. It never should have happened. You did not deserve it. That does not represent what the gospel or Jesus are about. And I'm very, very sorry on behalf of the church.
Oh.
I've done that so many times with people. The first time I remember ever doing it, I was teaching a class on ethics, for Pete's sake. And there was a person that had to take the class, but did not identify as Christian. And she was so angry with me from day one in the class. She was kind of scary. And I was a new professor, so it was really kind of scary. And there was this night, it was almost at the end of the course, where she finally got mad and sort of shouted to the whole class how she'd been harmed by the church years ago. And everybody was like, like everybody stopped breathing, and it was this very tense moment. Yeah. And I just said to her, I am so sorry that happened to you. The words I just said, something very similar. And I said, I'm really, really sorry on behalf of the church. And there was this amazing moment. And she said, those are the words I've been longing to hear. and then everything changed. She relaxed, and the rest of the semester we were able to actually have a relationship, and she stayed in touch for quite a while afterward. That was my first experience of that.
Wow. Charles, what do you want to tackle there?
Okay, so my head is going in two directions, just as the beginning points of this work. And one is to return to the interior work, and the other is to return to like our posture with our neighbors. So that's kind of where my head's at. So number one, I think how the beginning and integral to this work of cultivating communities of wounded healers is paying attention to our own points of pain, learning to process that and do our own healing work. Part of the realization for me in this work is realizing that the folks who harmed me the most deeply in religious contexts, in my case, it was within my extended family. I have come to learn how deeply wounded they were.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that their wounding sourced the way that they wounded me. And that opens space for me to have compassion for them, and also to realize the importance and the significance of tending to my own wounds, identifying them, processing the pain, as Resma Menakem would say, having clean pain rather than dirty pain. Dirty pain is the pain we allow to build up in our nervous system. We don't process it. Clean pain is processing it, naming it, grieving it, navigating it in the ways we've talked about. But I think that's it's the interior work. And I beg folks in this conversation who they have questions or they have theological imagination related to sexuality or to gender or to leadership that these stories chafe up against. It pushes and pokes at their theological convictions. And I invite them and implore them, would you just listen to the stories? Find ways to listen to the stories and allow the stories to reckon with your categories, to disrupt your categories. I love a line from Parker Palmer who talks about, he says, when the going gets rough, turn to wonder. Get curious. If tough stuff bubbles up in you, if you feel yourself getting defensive when you hear stories, get curious about that. When you hear stories of harm from other people, when you read about them, get curious about that. That's the pathway of learning and growth and development. That's the pathway of becoming trauma informed.
Yeah, so good. It's a difference between open wounds and scars that signify something happened and has left a mark, but they're not gaping wounds, open wounds anymore. So I really appreciate that. Gosh, thank you so much, both of you, for your time, for this work. I commend it to everyone to read. I think it is, I feel like I should say it's required reading for those of us who are about this work of these fresh expressions of church, these missional communities, and the work that is ahead of us, and the places and spaces where we can be about cultivating communities of wounded healers. So thank you both so much. I would love it if, Charles, would you pray for our listeners? Would you pray for those who have tuned in and are leaning into what this is all about?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you
for the invitation. Mother, Son, and Holy Spirit, thank you for the way you are an empathetic witness to the pain of the world. Thank you for the way you are at work to heal the wounds of the world and to heal the wounds caused by Christendom. And for all who are listening, for those who are faith leaders and congregations who are listening, would you give them grace and wisdom and strength to know how they can join you as empathetic witnesses to their own neighbors? Would you open their hearts and minds and awareness to see your work within them? Would you be at work to heal their wounds, to bear witness to their pain so that they can experience freedom and flourishing and wholeness? God, for those who have listened to this conversation and who have been reminded of really difficult, harmful, traumatic experiences that they've had in church or in religion, God, would you help them to be seen by you? Would you bear witness to their pain? Would you help them to know that they are loved, that wasn't their fault, that should never happen? Would you comfort them in your Holy Spirit and bring them healing and wholeness? Bring them people who can hold that pain and help them to process it.
Yes.
God, we thank you for your healing work. Would you give us the grace to be able to join you in it, in this world, in the name of the Mother and Son and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you. Thank you both. I look forward to our next conversation. And Charles, it's been great to get to know you more and look forward to what's next from both of you.
Thank you. Thanks so much,
Thanks, Heather.
Fresh Expressions is a worldwide movement of everyday missionaries who want to see churches thrive in the places we live, eat, work, and play by leveraging the creativity and endurance of the inherited church. To learn a simple 5-phase process for starting a new expression of church, go to freshexpressions.com/how to start. Want to learn more from the Fresh Expressions team? Head over to freshexpressions.com/training to learn ways we can work together to provide coaching, training, and inspiration for your church or organization. You can also get more resources like this on FX Connect, an online community full of other church leaders passionate about reaching new people in new places. Access our entire library of practical and inspiring training materials and connect with other church leaders at fxconnectus.org. Season 5 of the Fresh Expressions podcast is hosted by me, Heather Jalad. It's edited by Joel Limbaum and produced by Jeanette Statz, Kathleen Blackie, and Chris Morton. Our U.S. Director of Ministries is Shannon Kiser, and our Senior Director is Dr. Christopher Backert. If you have learned something or been encouraged by this podcast, please help us spread the word. You can give us a review on Apple Music or Spotify and share this episode on social media. Now may God bless you in your work for the kingdom.